Hello, everybody. My name is Laura Belmain, and I am going to be your host and guide for all things application security you can achieve in just 1 hour per sprint. In this video, we're going to demystify what we mean by software supply chain security. There's a lot of buzzwords in one sentence, and we're going to look at what that means to you as an engineer. Now, before I talk about software supply chain, let me just refresh us all on what a supply chain is. And because I love desserts, let's talk about desserts that will help us. And also, desserts. So let's talk about an apple pie. The supply chain for an apple pie is as follows. At the very end of the supply chain is your kitchen or the bakery that you bought it from. But before that, somebody had to make the pie, right? And they chose the ingredients. So the ingredients for an apple pie, you need to make pastry and you need to make pie filling. And for pastry, you need butter and flour and sugar. And for the filling, you probably needed apples and sugar and maybe a bit of cinnamon. Now, each of those ingredients then came from somewhere else. So to run a successful bakery, I needed a supplier that can give me all of those ingredients. It might have all come from one place, from a supermarket. That supermarket had to support its customers by supplying those products. So it's made relationships with an orchard where the apples are grown, and the place where the cinnamon comes from, and a dairy that has butter, and a mill that makes flour. And so what we have here is this connected chain from an orchard and from somewhere who grows and makes cinnamon through to somewhere who makes butter, all the way through to me eating a slice of delicious apple pie. Now, in software, it's the same deal. You might be making a banking software or a piece of AI that straps onto a tractor or whatever the amazing technology you're building is. But you're not building all of that. To build that, you need component parts. Now, some of those parts are foundational, things like a hosting platform, or maybe a credit card processor, or an authentication system. And some of those parts are smaller. They are libraries and frameworks you needed to make your own software. And so your software, that delivered end product, actually has this supply chain all the way back. It has the third-party systems you've purchased to use, and it also has all of the libraries and the frameworks and the components you've put together. And every single piece of this is connected. Now, if we go back to our apple pie analogy for a second, if I was to, have a natural disaster like we have around the world, sadly, at the moment, and the orchard has a really bad harvest of apples that year, then the supermarket can't get enough apples, which means that they can't sell the apples to the baker. So the baker switches this week to making cherry pies instead, because apples are really hard to come by, or they've become very, very expensive. So the vulnerability in that physical supply chain can happen at any point. Can we influence an element of this that means that the next stage up the chain is impacted? If we step up from our orchard to our baker, what if the baker has a fall and, they hurt themselves and they can't go to work next Tuesday? Well, on Wednesday, there's not going to be a supply of apple pies. Now, in our software supply chain, we bring it back to the digital world because we are engineers after all. Every little element of our software supply chain can impact the security of our overall product at the end. So that could be a third-party provider like your cloud hosting system that you use. If they're having an outage, if you've ever had one of those, you'll know that that's going to really impact your availability of your system. So your system isn't going to be available for people to use. They're going to get a little bit sad. Now, further down the supply chain, when we look at smaller components, what if you inherit a library? So you've chosen a library or framework to use that's going to solve a problem for you, and you discover that there's a functionality problem or a security vulnerability in that. Well, you've built that into your package now, and as a result, by the time it gets out into the production environment, everything in that final package is now impacted by that vulnerability, that issue in that small component. And that's what we mean about supply chain security. As engineers, this matters to us because while we're focused on the end result, I want to build an app that does X, Y, and Z, we have to be mindful that every decision we make to build our supply chain, to build that product, can impact the end result. Sometimes for the better. If you choose a really awesome component, it's going to be great. If you choose some vulnerable components or components that are not well maintained or components that have strange behaviors or perhaps are not as mature as they claim to be on the wrapper, then you might find the end result is more vulnerable in terms of security and also availability and resilience than you possibly imagined. So our job as engineers is to understand our software supply chain and then understand the steps we can take to ensure that we're keeping that quality there, that we're reducing the number of vulnerabilities that make it to the end. And that's where making good library choices comes in. If you've enjoyed this video and found it useful, please like and subscribe and check out the other videos in the series where we're going to walk through how to make good library choices, how to look at your software supply chain, and how to understand where those risks might be.